I will be turning this over to Tobi Hill-Meyer to give you guys the brief on Resolution 2160. I think. Thank you.
Hi, thank you everyone. If you give me a second, I will be sharing my screen. Okay, great, thank you. So for the record, my name is Tobi Hill-Meyer. I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Manager, and I will be giving you an update on the trans and non-binary resolution that was passed in 2020. So first off, I've got the full title of the resolution is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Olympia, Washington, recognizing injustice and harm against Black, Indigenous people of color, transgender, and non-binary people, and adoption of policies and actions to protect transgender and non-binary communities. I know the syntax is a little confusing here, but I'll just point out that this is intending to be an intersectional focus on transgender and non-binary people who are Black, Indigenous people of color. I want to start by giving a little bit of a history and background of where this resolution came from. So back in 2019, the Trans Day of Remembrance is a day where people reflect upon the trans people who have been murdered in the past year and honor their lives. And there was a the city tried to have a recognition of Trans Day of Remembrance by doing a light display with the colors of the trans pride flag projected up against City Hall. However, the flattest part of the building that is possible to do that light display is the side of the building where the police station is, and having the trans pride flag projected upon the police station led to some community complaints and concerns. From those concerns, the city responded very proactively to say, like, okay, how can we make up for this? What should the city be doing to support trans people? And that's where this resolution started. So the purpose is first to recognize harm and create a response. In the time, it was looking at increasing hate violence, but I want to also give some additional context for what this means today. In this year, 2022, we have seen over 120 anti-trans bills introduced in state legislatures around the country, and they've included bans on healthcare. There's been prosecuting of supportive parents of trans children, and even mandating detransition in one state. This has really escalated as of late, and with June being Pride Month, there has been an escalation of targeting the trans community. So I just wanted to share a few things that have happened in this past week. Last Wednesday, there was another state that passed legislation requiring, in this case, gynecological exams and expensive testing not covered by insurance in order for girls to be allowed to play sports, as a way of trying to ban trans girls from participating in sports. Then on the following day, Thursday, there was a school district where a trans student was facing harassment and filed a Title IX complaint. They opened up an investigation into the harassment, and the school received so many bomb threats that they had to move to virtual learning. And then there was a threat that they would bomb the school for real if the investigation was not dropped. And as a result, the school district dropped the investigation of harassment, setting a very concerning precedent. Then over this past weekend, there was a family-friendly drag event for parents to bring their children, and anti-trans protesters tried to force their way inside and demand it be shut down. And now a politician in that area is calling for drag shows to have an age limit. Also over the weekend, a couple of prominent anti-trans activists and politicians have made some really concerning statements calling for trans medical care to be made illegal for people of all ages, and naming trans people as a huge problem that and the solution needs to be reducing the number of trans people, which many have interpreted as a very concerning threat of instigating genocide. And so it's with this context that it's really important to be considering this resolution and what the city is doing to try and address the trans community. And so the purpose of what this resolution is doing is to identify gaps and barriers in our systems and to try and improve those services and access for everyone. It's based on an intersectional focus of looking at some of the people who are experiencing the most barriers, with the philosophy being that by making sure a system is going to work for the people experiencing the most barriers, you're going to be guaranteeing that it's going to be an effective system working for everyone. And with that, I'll go ahead and read out the actual resolution. Since it's been a while, I'm sure not everyone is fresh with it. So whereas, and again, this is from 2020, whereas a reported 66 Black transgender women have been murdered in the United States between January 2018 and the present day, of which 10 deaths have transpired between June 2020 and August 2020. And whereas Black transgender women experiencing direct and systemic harm at a dangerous and alarming rate, including but not limited to physical and emotional violence, discrimination in healthcare, mental health care, employment, housing, and public programs providing basic needs for survival. And whereas Washington's Law Against Discrimination, Chapter 49.60 RCW, explicitly prohibits discrimination based on gender expression or identity, and that this protection includes, but is not limited to, employment, housing, health insurance, and places of public accommodation. And whereas a November 2019 local study with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, transgender women, and non-binary people in Thurston County found that 89% of its participants experienced housing insecurity, 78% experienced violence and unemployment, 75% experienced unemployment discrimination, and 55% experienced inadequate medical care and food insecurity. And whereas a March 2020 local study with transgender women and non-binary people in Thurston County found that 63% of participants made under $2,000 a month, 75% of participants were unemployed between 2018 and 2020, and only 38% of participants had adequate health care. And whereas the harms of discrimination have a significant impact on Black, Indigenous, people of color, transgender, and non-binary people, and reforms will often fail to include these harms unless they are specifically focused on. And whereas the City of Olympia recognizes that it is illegal discrimination to not allow employees to use their chosen name and pronouns, and that when a coworker or supervisor is repeatedly and or intentionally using the wrong name or pronouns, it may also be considered sexual harassment. And whereas the City of Olympia recognizes that when a social service agency fails to intervene when a client faces transphobic harassment from other clients or staff, that is a form of illegal discrimination. Now, therefore, the Olympia City Council does hereby resolve as follows. 1, The City of Olympia recognizes that Black, transgender, and non-binary lives matter. 2, the City of Olympia commits to making its commitment to a safer, stronger, and thriving space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, transgender, and non-binary people, and especially Black transgender women. Here I'm going to slow down a little bit as we move into the part of the resolution, which are the action items. And so for these two first action items, these are commitments that the city is making, and an ongoing commitment that we will continue to be making as we consider work and acts within the city that may impact the trans community. Number 3, the City of Olympia will ensure that city services are equitable to all by providing city staff and its contractors with access to comprehensive workplace diversity training that includes gender identity, transgender equality, implicit bias, and the intersectionality of race and disability. And so I'll mention that the city has been working with the local LGBTQ supportive organization to create and administer training for staff and contractors, and got to meet with them recently. This is going to be the purview of the new diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator in human resources to set up overall DEI training for city staff, and we'll be following up around this once that person begins working on June 21st. Then we have 4, the City of Olympia will work together with local transgender rights leaders and organizations on data collection and best practices to ensure that Black, Indigenous, people of color, transgender, and non-binary people have fair access to employment and promotion within the city by including transgender and non-binary people in anonymous demographic data collection for employment, current employees, and management, and then use that collected information to improve hiring and HR practices. And I will say that the online system for applications and hiring that we have been using, NeoGov, I was able to put together an update in July of last year that implemented trans inclusive demographic collection, and that's also going to be a part of the equity audit that will be happening later this year. I do want to take a quick moment to take an aside and explain what it means for demographic data collection to be trans inclusive. And so I just wanted to demonstrate here that some non-inclusive options that you often see would be to ask for gender, male or female, and trans people who identify as male or female can mark themselves off as one or the other, but there's no way to indicate that they are trans. And reviewing the data, it's impossible to look at how trans people are impacted. Then you see some places that will just add in trans as a third option, like man, woman, trans. But this also creates a problem because it makes trans people choose between being seen as a man or woman or being seen as trans, as it's not possible to mark yourself off as both. So the inclusive option that we are using includes a note explaining that cisgender is a term for people who are not transgender, and then gives the options of cisgender man, cisgender woman, transgender man, transgender woman, and non-binary. And that's what we have been using since the update in July, and what we will be using moving forward as we collect demographics in other areas as well. So moving on to action item number 5, the City of Olympia will ensure that all social service programs funded by the city are made available to Black, Indigenous, people of color, transgender, and non-binary people by including them in all client demographic collection as a way to identify where transgender and non-binary people are or are not being adequately served. So this may include programs through the courts, familiar faces, parks and recreation, homeless services, and others. And we need to do more work on identifying programs within the city that this might apply to. And we know there's a need for consistent data collection processes and to ensure that it is all trans inclusive. I've been working on a guide for collecting demographic data that's nearing completion and will be used as we start implementing a standardization across the city. Number 6, the City of Olympia will ensure that all professional services for and bidding contracted with the city will explicitly prohibit transphobic discrimination or harassment, including transgender exclusion policies or practices in health benefits. And so I will just jump aside and show that we have updated our contracts, and now our standard contract template includes the following language. Our list of groups that you're not allowed to discriminate against includes gender identity, and there's also an addition with language taken directly from the resolution that unlawful discrimination includes transphobic discrimination or harassment, including transgender exclusion policies or practices in health benefits. Then number 7, this is a large one I couldn't fit onto one slide, but the City of Olympia commits to developing plans to make all city services and contracted social services equitably available to all through the work of the Social Justice and Equity Commission. And in that work, there will be an area of focus on transgender and non-binary people with a specific focus on significantly improving safety and community services for Black, Indigenous people of color, transgender and non-binary communities, and especially for Black transgender women. Black transgender women, in collaboration with city staff, will be included in developing any plans of action moving forward. Planning efforts will develop model policies, identify barriers, service gaps, health and well-being disparities, and create action steps to remove those barriers and set benchmarks to measure success. The city will adopt best practices through input from Black, Indigenous people of color, transgender, and non-binary community members who will remain involved and included in implementation as that unfolds. This is something that since the Commission has only just had its first meeting this past month, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to incorporate these elements into it moving forward. But reflecting back on what's happened in the past year and a half, there has not been much direct inclusion of Black transgender women in collaborating with the city on these processes. So that is definitely something that we need to be working more on, and we'll be looking for opportunities to do that as the Commission moves forward, potentially engaging with consultants. So in summary, I want to, that was a huge information download, so I'm just going to share with you this little chart to show the different action items and the next steps that we're working on. So action items number 1 and 2 are ongoing commitments. Action item number 3, we are going to be doing a follow-up around a staff training and putting together potentially a video training for contractors. Number 4 is done. Number 5, we need to identify any additional programs that we should be collecting demographic data around, and then completing the demographic collection guide. Number 6 is done. And number 7, the Commission's community engagement will do some of this, and also having that intersectional focus on transgender justice, and specifically a focus on Black trans women, will be incorporated into other areas of the Commission's work. So with that is my entire presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Toby. I just want to clarify that you made the same presentation to the Community Livability and Public Safety Committee a week or so ago, and I learned something more this time. There's a lot of information to get our heads around. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Councilmember Payne?
Yes, thank you, Toby, again for the presentation. I just wanted to, you did such a wonderful job at explaining it in committee a few weeks ago, but if you could you just explain to everyone why specifically you are mentioning Black transgender women specifically?
Yeah, so one of the things coming from the Trans Day of Remembrance, which was the event that sparked off everything around this resolution, we look at the number of trans people who were killed every year and try and take a moment to reflect on and honor them. And invariably every year, the list is almost entirely trans women, and it is almost entirely trans people of color. And so especially in 2020, we saw a very disproportionately large number of Black trans women who were on that list of people who were murdered for being trans. And when we take a look at some of those specific intersections, that intersectional focus, like I said, there's the idea is that if you look at identity groups one at a time, or if you look at a program without any kind of identity focus, you're going to be missing things. There's going to be experiences and barriers and people who are not able to participate in a program that you're not going to notice. But when you start looking at the people who are at those intersections and experience the most marginalizations and face the most barriers, then you're going to be identifying all of the barriers that would prevent people from accessing a program. You're going to be able to better identify all the different ways that you can improve a program. And so by taking that intersectional focus on the most marginalized populations, that's really the only way to make sure that everyone is going to effectively be able to access those programs and improve those programs in ways that often are significant benefit to other populations who might not be that one community that you're focused on. Like for example, in kind of like looking at universal accessibility design, there's a lot of different things that you might do for trying to make a space more physically accessible to people with disabilities. And in doing so, you often make it a lot more accessible for people who are non-disabled, and make it really a lot more accessible for families, for parents, for all different kinds of communities that might also face some barriers, because you're really trying to think about all the possible barriers that anyone might be facing and remove them.
Great explanation. I've got Councilmember Parsley, followed by Mayor Pro Tem Gill. Councilmember Madrone, you put your hand down. I didn't, sorry. I'm out of practice. So Councilmember Parsley, followed by Councilmember Madrone, followed by Mayor Pro Tem Gilman.
I don't have a specific question, Toby, except for that I remember this whole sequence of events, and I remember the council pulling forward this resolution. And more importantly, I remember the day we hired you. And boy, did we get that right. You have not slowed down. A lot of people hit the job running, but you're still running. And it's almost 2 years later to have number 4 and 6 done. amazing. I can't wait to see what you do with the rest and your explanations and your insight and the way you kind of look at this whole thing holistically. It's amazing. Absolute gem. Linnea, you need to find a way to keep Toby, okay? Because amazing. That's all I want to say.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Councilmember Madrone?
Yeah, I just want to offer some brief accolades as well. Toby, I was so looking forward to meeting you in person finally, but alas, thwarted. But next time. I'll just say that, you know, when we were having a lot of really tough conversations in 2020 around equity and what we wanted to do as a city, I just had so many doubts about whether we could actually get there. But after having you come on, Olivia doing her work, and a third person that's going to be coming on, I just have to say that I'm just very proud of the work that you've been doing with your colleagues, and I just am just eternally grateful that we've been able to. It's nice to see things that say "done" with an exclamation mark behind them, and I know we have so much more work to do, but I have complete faith that we, as a governmental institution, that we can get it done with folks like you working with us. So thank you much.
And Mayor Pro Tem Gilman.
Thank you. First, I just want to acknowledge that it is a struggle for me, like the word cisgender in front of male or female, and then understanding there's an explanatory note. But the new language, the unfamiliar ideas and language that we're all struggling with, I think that it's really part of building a broader social justice and belonging sort of culture is needing to struggle with language and ideas that have served to marginalize folks. And it was really underscored for me on Saturday. The city was one of the sponsors of Pride, and to be in a day and a place where people could be themselves, it tells you about the sort of the power and the potential, right, of just respecting people as they are. And I'll just close by saying I think tonight's presentation and this good work over the last couple of years is a reaffirmation that while it seems kind of bold, as Councilmember Payne was offering, I think we continue to say that you center those who are most marginalized as you shape this work. And so for me, Black, transgender, and non-binary lives matter.
Councilmember Cooper.
Yeah, and to riff off of the Mayor Pro Tem, especially when they're young, because I think that, you know, in those populations and youth are even more marginalized. And I'm so proud of us, Toby. I was thinking as you're talking, I met you the first time in the conference room upstairs with the city manager and some of our just phenomenal gender rights advocates in our community, and we're so lucky to have them. And a lot of people looking from the outside would say Olympia started this journey in this space in 2020, and it's so far from the truth. It makes me want to throw up sometimes, because our community, our city as an institution has been on the path and is learning along the way and trying to do better at every single turn. And certainly, 2020 and 2021 set us into a new place. And I don't want to belittle that, but this is hard work, and we have some great accomplishments, and there's still a lot left to do. So I really appreciate particularly the detailed level of accountability in this presentation. And I hope that we continue to do that with the other resolutions that we've passed in all of our work. Toby, I have two questions. The first question is, in that original meeting after the Trans Day of Remembrance, there was an idea around Olympia helping tell this human resources story to other human resources directors and entities in our community, of which there's a lot, especially when we look at the state. government and other partners that we have. Is that something that's in your work plan right now to take this conversation broader in the community, or is that the next level of resourcing it?
Yeah, I haven't been doing any specific HR to HR kinds of connections, but I can tell you that one of the things that's on the work plan for the Social Justice and Equity Commission is to be doing community outreach and education. And I think that part of it is that there are different like pieces for under HR. There are different pieces of non-discrimination law and rulemaking that a lot of businesses might not understand, or they might not be familiar enough with trans people to know what's appropriate or inappropriate when you have a trans employee or when you have trans customers. And I think part of that outreach and education is going to be specifically around non-discrimination and some of those human resources kinds of points. But I'm really glad that you reminded me of that, because I think that there is a great power in having speaking from a place of authority within the Human Rights Department of the city to be able to have those conversations with other human resources departments in other agencies. I will mention that one thing I have been able to do has been getting to talk with other diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists at other cities. It's been one of my favorite parts of the job, that like there's a lot of people being hired into new positions, and they often reach out to people with more established positions. And so I've gotten to talk to a few of them, and that's included some of these pieces, and especially when it comes to the update to our hiring system that happened last year, and kind of like explaining what that looked like and how other cities might be able to do that. That's something that I have been able to do across those lines to other cities and other agencies.
That's great. And I love the speaking with authority comment, because I think, as you're saying that, I clicked on the city website to make sure I was right. But one of the main 5 tabs at the top of our city website is business. And what would it look like to put just some basic resources about this conversation there for people that are thinking about doing business in the City of Olympia, something that wouldn't cost us very much maybe. And I'm not trying to create you work, but I think it is important for us to tell the story and share it. And my last comment is more, I realize it's a comment, not a question. And that's, I just think it's important to me around the training aspect that we make sure that the training we do across the city matches the importance of the conversation. And I hate to even say this in public, but I'm in the information technology doghouse right now because I haven't done my cybersecurity training that's required as a city employee. And if I don't do that, my whole account will be cut off. And this conversation is 1,000 times more important. And so I hope that that's how we see it as we develop the training and think about who's going to take it and how often and what contractors. And kind of to close my comments, if we're thinking about an equity summit with the broader community and businesses and nonprofits, some of these things need to be a part of that conversation as well. So, thank you.
Absolutely. I get a little protective when I hear, our desire to have Tobi out there teaching other people how to do this, because then she'll get stolen from us. We just lost a great employee for that very same reason. So kind of joking, kind of not, but also just wanted to speak to the fact that we had a city manager that open-armed this whole idea, and this council put the money where the budget, to have 3 FTEs around diversity for a city our size is, I'm pretty sure, unheard of. But I just want to commend Jay for being so open-minded about embracing learning and meeting with the group that took us to task. And that's not always easy. And, you know, didn't let ego get in the way, and we just wanted to learn to be a better organization. And so thank you, Toby, for the report card back where we are now. Lots of work ahead, but really proud of where we are.